Welcome back, everybody. This is Aestus from Aestus Guides, and we're doing another Baldur's Gate 3 class review. This time we're focused on the Ranger. Now, if this is your first time joining us, I usually start these videos with a short story or a joke just to get us into it, but for this one, I'm just going to do a rant. Sorry. But also, you're welcome, because this is going to be fire content. And if I was smart, I would expand it, make it its own video for double the clicks, but I figure just save the min-maxing for the video games. YouTube is about talking about the things I want to talk about, and right now I want to talk about how the Ranger class has lost its identity. So let me ask you this. What even is a Ranger? The broader RPG community has been debating classed versus classless systems for, years now. And I'm going to weigh in on that sometime soon, but I'll just say this, that the advantage of classes comes from those classes having a place in the setting, a connection to the themes and the aesthetic of your game. And you know the feeling when you're flipping through the PHB or you're in character creation, you're scrolling through the class options and you see one of the classes and think, I want to be that. That's what my character is. When you do that for the Ranger class, what are you wanting to be? Right? Take for example some of the really good instances of class design, like the Warlock. When you decide to be a Warlock, you are picking a certain theme for your character, and that theme is about making a deal with a probably evil higher power, and the tension that comes between, you depending on that higher power. It gives your character a direction, a narrative direction. What's the narrative direction for a Ranger? Are you just a hunter? Someone who uses a bow and dual scimitars? It needs to be more than that. And I think it is more than that, but we've kind of forgotten what Rangers are, and thus my rant. So here's what the 5th edition PHB says the Ranger is. Quote, Warriors of the Wilderness, Rangers specialize in hunting the monsters that threaten the edges of civilization. So, are they just fighters that specialize in hunting one kind of monster? If that's the case, why do they get druid spells, for example? It doesn't explain it. Now, they answer about the druid spells. Thanks to their familiarity with the wilds, Rangers acquire the ability to cast spells that harness nature's power, much as a druid does. This tells me nothing. How do they acquire it? Is druid magic just something you pick up if you spend a lot of time camping? Does Thornwhip come with your Eagle Scout badge? The edition that really understood Rangers is the one we all agreed to hate, which is 4th edition, of course. They capture the class beautifully in one sentence, the very first sentence of their description. I'll read it to you. Quote, Rangers are watchful warriors who roam past the horizon to safeguard a region, a principle, or a way of life. That's the key part. They safeguard a region, a principle, or a way of life that's on the edges of civilization. Rangers are, or should be, the guardians of a rural community, the keepers of an older way of life. This description carves out a place for them in the setting. It clearly delineates the class's central themes and imbues the class mechanics with narrative significance. Take as an illustration the mechanic of getting druid spells. In an older milieu of D&D, it was understood that clerics represented an analog to medieval Catholicism, whereas in contrast, druids represented paganism. In a Middle Ages setting, especially earlier Middle Ages, for a rural community on the outskirts of Europe, paganism was about the old gods and the old ways of your ancestors. In the cultural and political capitals, the old ways are apostate, and all practitioners are persecuted into irrelevance. But on the edges, on the horizon, they are still remembered and practiced, and Rangers are the guardians of those horizon communities. They're the ones who don't leave their home for fame and fortune in the capitals, but remember, protect, and transmit the way things used to be. And this perfectly explains why they'd have druid spells, because they're the ones who practice these things. And like the Warlock, Rangers under this description, when you pick them, you are choosing a theme, a narrative direction for your character. It's about the themes of home, of tradition, of clinging to a dying way of life. And personally, I find that really compelling. And if Rangers were presented to me this way, I would want to play them more. Alright, enough of that, let's get to the class mechanics. As usual, I like to start with the base stats and proficiencies. Rangers have the 1d10 hit point progression, which is good. Again, if this is your first time, I consider the 1d8 hit point progression to be vanilla. It's like base, not good, not bad. And 1d10 is one step above, so it's into the good territory. If you have 1d10 hit points, you can expect to be a little bit more durable than your average character. Saving throws are strength and dexterity. To be honest, I don't like these. So the way I think about saving throws is there's a major 3 and the minor 3. The major 3 are dexterity, constitution, wisdom. The minor 3 are strength, charisma, and intelligence. With the way classes are designed, they always give you, at level 1, one of the major 3 and one of the minor 3. And of the major 3, the two best are wisdom and constitution, and dexterity is the third place one. And so Rangers get the dexterity saving throw, already not off to a good start, and then for their minor 3, they get strength, which is actually probably the best of the minor 3, but it creates this tension, because in our builds, we usually pick either strength or dexterity, right? So one of these you won't be investing in, you won't get it up to level 20, and it means it's just going to be a little bit lower. So, like, it's not terrible, it doesn't ruin the class or anything, but yeah, its saving throws could be better. For their armor proficiencies, they get light and medium armor, and then a shield proficiency. This is all we need. That's enough so far in early access. That's great. And then for weapons, they get all the weapons, simple and martial. So their armor and weapon proficiencies are really good. Their saving throw proficiencies are mediocre, could be better. All right, now let's talk about the actual class features. And if you are coming from tabletop, these are different than what you'll see in tabletop. So in this game, you get to choose at level 1 a favored enemy and a natural explorer. And these are just options you get to pick. They're a flavor for your class, but they also give you some mechanics. We'll go through them one at a time. First, favored enemies. Bounty Hunter. You gain proficiency in investigation, and creatures you hit with the Ensnaring Strike, which is a level 1 spell that Rangers will get, have disadvantage on their saving throw to resist. Disadvantage on a saving throw is really good. It makes Ensnaring Strike actually reliable. So this is actually one of the better ones, but there's a problem, and that is that Ensnaring Strike takes your concentration. And most Rangers use their concentration on a spell called Hunter's Mark, which we'll get to. So it's actually rare, even though it's a great bonus, it's rare that you even use Ensnaring Strike. Next up, Keeper of the Veil. You specialize in hunting creatures from other planes of existence. You gain proficiency in Arcana, and can cast Protection from Evil and Good, which is a good but situational spell. Yeah, what's to say about this? It's a good but situational favorite enemy. Magebreaker. You have history in battling spellcasters. You gain proficiency with Arcana again, and the True Strike cantrip, which is not a good cantrip. So, Magebreaker, not that great. Not very impactful. Ranger Knight. You have sworn to serve a crown or nation and seek to bring its foes to ruin. Gain skill proficiency with history and armor proficiency with heavy armor. So this is really interesting. And maybe when we get to the point of the game where heavy armors are more frequent and powerful, then Ranger Knight could be really good. I mean, this will allow you to not invest so much in your dexterity, and you can move those points other places, maybe strength and constitution, and make a really good frontline melee ranger. So, but for now in the game, heavy armor proficiency gets us nothing because medium armors are better. So Ranger Knight is getting us nothing. And then the last one, Sanctified Stalker. You swore to hunt the enemies of a holy druidic order, gain proficiency in religion, and the Sacred Flame cantrip, which deals 1d8 damage. We talked about the Sacred Flame cantrip when we covered the cleric. It is a save spell cantrip. That means it's not an attack roll, it has a saving throw to resist. And save spell cantrips are absolutely terrible. So Sacred Flame is really bad. So takeaway about favorite enemy, pretty much all of these are, like, at best, they're average. Ranger Knight might be interesting eventually. Bounty Hunter is really interesting, but it competes with another resource, so it's rare to use it. I usually take Bounty Hunter because I like to play around with it. Keeper of the Veil can be good just for those situational fights, just because the rest of these aren't that great. So that's favorite enemy. Now let's look at Natural Explorer, which actually is quite good. Starting out, we'll go with Beast Tamer. By the way, Natural Explorer is supposed to represent, you know, the sort of terrain or the wild that you're in, or that you're used to, let's say. Beast Tamer. Beast Tamer, you've cultivated a strong bond with animals, and you can cast the Find Familiar spell as a ritual. Not bad. Find Familiar isn't a great spell, but it's a summon, and summons are just always good in BG3, because summons get their own actions, and the nature of the 5e system is that even low-value actions have a lot of value. You know, it's more about the amount of actions that you have than how strong those actions are. So summons are always good. This is a ritual. It's not taking up a spell slot. So you can have your familiar up in every fight. I actually did a build. It wasn't a very strong build. I called it a meme build for Minsk, playing Minsk in Baldur's Gate 3. But you can see it on my website. It uses the Beast Tamer Natural Explorer feature. Next up, Urban Tracker. You are an expert at navigating the wild within the city. You gain the Sleight of Hand proficiency. Sleight of Hand proficiency is really great, but there's just other ways to get it. Asterion has it. Shadowheart has it. I never run a party that doesn't have at least one of them. So, not really worth it to spend an entire Natural Explorer on. Because you could be spending it on one of these Wasteland Wanderers. And all three Wasteland Wanderers are going to give you resistance to a different damage type. So if your Wasteland is the Tundra, you get resistance to cold damage. If it's the desert, you get resistance to fire. And if it's a swamp, you get resistance to poison. All three of these are good. Fire and poison are more common than cold. I prefer to take poison because I consider it, in my runs, it's probably the most common damage type that isn't just physical damage. I mean, you face poison when you fight spiders. A lot of enemies will dip their weapons in poison. You face poison when you fight the hag. So, yeah, I like to take poison. Fire is a good second, but you can also gain fire resistance with a Create Water spell. And then, as I said, cold's actually really interesting because it will cancel out the vulnerability from Create Water. So I almost kind of prefer it to fire. You can just cancel out the vulnerability to cold, and then you get resistance to fire anyways. But really, again, all three of these are good because having resistance to a damage type is very strong. It's very strong. So that is Favorite Enemy and Natural Explorer, and I think that's all we get to choose at level 1. The next two features that Rangers get for their base class will be at level 2. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. At level 2, Rangers get their final 2 base class features. Those features are a fighting style and their spells. So let's start with fighting style. We actually covered fighting styles last week when we talked about the fighter. So if you want more detail, you can go back there. I go over all of the fighting styles. Rangers also get fighting styles, but they get a more limited list. They get archery, defense, dueling, and 2-weapon fighting. So here's what we said about these last week. Archery gives you +2 bonus to your ranged weapon attacks. A +2 bonus to hit is very good. except that right now in early access, ranged weapons already hit very reliably. You can get advantage on ranged attacks when you hide as a bonus action. You can get a +2 to your ranged attacks with high ground. This would be adding another +2 on top of it, which in many situations is just overkill. You don't need that much accuracy. That said, just when thought about in general, a +2 to hit is always a good boost. So maybe in the full release of the game, when we get features like feats that allow us to sacrifice some accuracy to get more damage, archery is going to be really, really good. But for now, it's kind of average. Defense gives you +1 bonus to your armor class when you wear armor, which is all the time. This is a boring but consistent boost. A +1 to armor class is great in the very flat math of 5th edition. And you're getting this every time someone attacks you, which will be often, right? So defense is always a good boost, but can be a little boring. Dueling gives you +2 bonus to your damage when you're using a one-handed melee weapon, and you do not have a weapon in your other hand. I consider this one the worst of the fighting styles, but it's still really not that bad. It's a +2 flat bonus to damage. It's kind of nice. And then finally, 2, weapon fighting style is really interesting. When you make an attack with your offhand, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of that attack. Obviously, normally you would not be able to. This brings your offhand attack kind of up to par to your main hand attack. And what's really cool about this is there are items in this game which allow you to make 2 offhand attacks because they give you another bonus action. Right? So this is allowing you to multiply your strength or dexterity modifier twice because you'll be getting 2 bonus actions. And overall, that's the most bonus to damage that you get from any of these fighting styles. So 2-weapon fighting style is a fantastic striking feature for the ranger. And really, it also synergizes with a spell that the ranger gets. So let's talk about those spells. There are 2 that I want to highlight in the ranger spell list. The first is Hunter's Mark, and this is the one that synergizes so well with 2-weapon fighting style. Hunter's Mark is the first of what I call the 4E striker spells. In 4th edition, strikers often had a feature like Hunter's Mark, where it's usually a single target debuff, which gives you 1d6 damage on your attacks against that target. It requires concentration, but usually these will reset once you've killed a target. So casting it once, if you cast it on target, kill them, you can get to reapply it to a different target later. And that gives you a lot of longevity and a lot of damage from a level 1 spell slot, making them hyper efficient as far as spell slots go. What Hunter's Mark does, it gives you 1d6 slashing damage on your weapon attacks. And with all of these spells, because they proc on a hit, you want to stack up as many attacks as you can while you have them. Right? It's like a 1d6 that's multiplied over each attack. So the more attacks, the more you're getting out of the spell. And so if you dual wield, that's getting another attack. If you dual wield and you have the Helm of Grit and you're below half of your health, that's getting a 3rd attack. And on each of those attacks, you're going to proc Hunter's Mark. So that really adds up. It gives you quite a bit of damage on the dual wielding ranger striker. In fact, I consider the dual wielding ranger striker to be kind of the default baseline go-to striker. And in my builds on my website, I began by comparing my striker builds in DPR to the DPR damage of this kind of ranger, just because I feel like this ranger is so consistent and reliable with its damage. Okay, so that's Hunter's Mark. The other spell I want to highlight is this one, Ensnaring Strike. Ensnaring Strike I see as kind of a competitor to Hunter's Mark, because it will also do a bonus 1d6 damage. How it works, though, is you cast it on a target with a weapon attack. So you get a normal weapon attack when you use this. Then that target has to make a saving throw. It's a strength saving throw, and if they fail, they are ensnared. An ensnared target cannot move, and you also have advantage on attack rolls against them, and they have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. So, furthermore, with Ensnaring Strike, they will take 1d6 damage on their turn while they are ensnared. But they can use their action to try to tear away the vines, which gives them another chance at making that strength saving throw. This can be really quite good, especially if you take the Bounty Hunter feature that we talked about at level 1, which gives them disadvantage on this saving throw. Compared to Hunter's Mark, you're going to get less per spell slot when you cast this spell, because it does not reapply on death like Hunter's Mark does. However, what it gives you on a single target is quite good. You're getting a little bit extra damage on your attack, you're getting some lockdown capability, and if they're the type of unit that doesn't have a good strength saving throw, you might be able to cancel several of their actions as they use them to try to tear it away and just fail their saving throw. So it can be great for that. Sadly, you cannot use both Ensnaring Strike and Hunter's Mark because they both require concentration, which is too bad because both of these feel like core to the Ranger identity, you know, that Hunter, Woodland Warrior identity. But because they both require concentration, you can't use them both simultaneously. There are other great spells here. Others I'll just highlight. Jump, Longstrider, fantastic for mobility. Fog Cloud, you can get up to some really clever stealth tactics with it. These are all great spells to use as well. I give the Ranger base class a B tier. Now, they are a striker class entirely, and this is the most common class role in early access so far. For strikers, we've already covered the fighter, and we've covered the barbarian. Both of those were solely striker classes as well. Now we have the ranger, and there will be a fourth solely striker class in the rogue, which we'll talk about next week. And when we talk about the rogue, I think I will compare all of them together. But the ranger is a B-tier striker, which puts it solidly in the middle in my book. It does have that 1d10 hit point progression, which makes it comparable to the fighter, but its base class features don't really compare to the fighter's base class features. It gets a fighting style like the fighter does, but it gets fewer options to choose from. It does get a resistance, an elemental resistance, either poison, fire, or cold. But will that mitigate more damage than the healing that a fighter gets from Second Wind? I don't really think it does. And then it gets spells. And particularly one spell, Hunter's Mark, is really good, and that's enough to make this, as I've said, it makes the Ranger a great striker, a very reliable damage striker, but there are some problems with it. For one, the Ranger does not get a Constitution saving throw proficiency, and Hunter's Mark does depend on concentration. And because of this, I find that the Ranger is favored as a range striker than a melee striker. If you're at range, you avoid more attacks. But right now, it takes a severe hit to its damage per round when you do that. Because two-weapon fighting combined with Hunter's Mark, combined with items like Helm of Grit, which gives you that extra bonus stack, is just such good damage, and there are not comparable item combos that you can use with ranged attacks. So there's a little bit of tension right now with the Ranger where it's not great at at concentration saving throws, but it depends on them. That's a little bit of a problem. And ultimately, what Hunter's Mark is offering you is reliable round-to-round damage. Whereas the fighter has Action Surge, which will not equal as much damage in the long run, but does give you that tactical burst of damage that you need to eliminate a target early before they take rounds. And ultimately, I value that a little bit more than the just round over round 1d6 extra damage. But by all means, the Ranger is a good striker. B tier does not mean bad. B tier means you are a good striker. And so if you like the Ranger, maybe you like the identity of the Ranger as that woodland warrior who fights on the horizons, then by all means play one. They're a good class. Rangers get their subclasses at level 3, and we have 2 options so far. We're going to evaluate each and give them a rank, of course, as we do. Our 2 options are Hunter and Beastmaster for the Ranger class. We're going to start with Hunter. Now, Hunter, both of these will add 1 feature to the Ranger base class. The feature that Hunter adds is called Hunter's Prey. Hunters are that kind of Ranger that specializes in killing a particular kind of enemy. And as opposed to the somewhat static and boring favorite enemy options that we've had in past editions of D&D, 5th edition gives us Hunter's Prey, where you can pick between one of these 3 choices for the kind of monster that you typically hunt. The 3 options are Colossus Slayer, Giant Killer, Horde Breaker. Colossus Slayer allows you to, once per turn, deal an extra 1d8 damage if a target is below its maximum hit points. So if you've damaged it once, then you will do an extra 1d8 damage on the first attack that you hit against it in a turn. This is very reliable, because very often you'll be attacking units that are below their hit point maximum. 1d8 damage will average to 4.5 extra damage per hit, and you do multiply this on a crit. What's there to say about this, except that it's an extra damage to a striker. Very reliable to proc, a great feature. Next up is Giant Killer. Giant Killer only procs if you are attacked by a large or bigger creature. When this happens, you are able to use your... Oh, pardon me. That creature must be within 1.5 meters of you, or 5 feet if you use feet. Basically melee range. Now, if that melee range, large or bigger creature attacks you, you can use your reaction to make a retaliation attack, which is just a full attack, like a normal attack, with all of the benefits that you get from normal attacks. Now, attacking on a reaction is so good. You know, we talked about it last week when we talked about riposte for the Battle Master. Reactions are the hardest of the action slots to utilize. And you want to utilize all of the action slots in 5th edition. That's just the fundamental math of the game. It's about the actions, the amount of actions you take, more than the potency of the actions you take. That's the way the game's balanced. So, using a reaction consistently, fantastic. Using it for a standard attack, that is actually a pretty potent use of it. Great feature, except that it is actually so situational to use. Only when you're attacked by large or bigger creatures. So I think of this as like the boss fight feature. It's going to help you in boss fights, but against all of the trash mobs, it's not going to do that much. Now, there is a little trick. It's really like a joke, like a meme trick, where you can use the spell, wizard, or sorcerer spell Enlarge Person on enemies to make them large or bigger, so that when they attack you, you get that retaliation attack. Yeah, it's you're actually giving an enemy a boost so that you can get this retaliation attack. It's still kind of decent for you. It's not as bad as people say, but also it's not reliable to hit because it's a Constitution saving throw to resist being enlarged. I wish they would just let it happen for free because you are buffing them. They should just accept it. It's a buff. Anyways, if you find that funny, you should check out my build on my website, Miniature Giants. It's completely built around abusing the enlarged person giant killer combo. But I still, even with that combo, I still rank giant killer probably the worst because it's the most situational of these to use. Next up is Horde Breaker. Horde Breaker, you can use this when there are two enemies standing close to each other. I think it's basically 5 feet or 1.5 meters. It might be 10 feet or 3 meters. I can't remember exactly. You should test it out to see. Anyways, when two enemies are standing close to each other, you can make an attack on each of them. So this is quite good. You're making 2 attacks. That's great. You just have to spread those attacks out, which is still kind of fine. You're making 2 attacks. It's great to make 2 attacks. Problems with this. It does not help with boss fights. This is the trash mob one. So we have like a boss fight exclusive feature. We kind of have a trash mob exclusive feature. And both of them are really good, except that they're a little restricted on how you use them. And, the situations you can use them for. For this reason, it's basically always best just to go with Colossus Slayer. Because while Colossus Slayer isn't as potent, you always get it. You're reliably going to proc it. So, I just think of the Hunter as Colossus Slayer now. I often forget that there even are the Giant Killer and the Horde Breaker options. Picking the Hunter is effectively, at these lower levels, just giving you that extra 1d8 damage per turn. Now, before we rank this subclass, I just have to pop off one more time. The writer in me is just raging. I don't understand, and I've never understood all these years, why we have a feature called Giant Killer and another feature, a different feature, called Colossus Slayer. Colossus, colloquially, is just a synonym for giant. And Slayer is just a synonym for killer. They're not distinct. And so I get these confused all the time. I mean, it really bothers me. So take that or leave that. Ranking. I rank the Hunter an A tier base class because even though Colossus Slayer is not a lot of extra damage, it's still a lot of extra damage when you realize how often you will be getting it. Practically every round you will be proccing that extra 1d8, and this is a striker class. Doing damage is what it's about. So that is A tier for Hunter. Now let's move on to Beastmaster. The second subclass is, of course, the Beastmaster. The Beastmaster, like the Hunter, adds one feature to the Ranger base class. This feature is called Summon Companion. And you can pretty much imagine what this does. This summons an animal companion. So it doesn't actually show you what the animal companions are in the level up screen. So we will just... Okay. So when you pick this class, you can see here in the Ranger tab, you get the Summon Companion. This takes an action to cast. And it gives you the option to summon one of five animal companions. Wolf, wolf spider, bear, boar, and dire raven. Now each of these has its own kind of tactical niche. I'll say a little bit about each of them, but there's some I want to highlight in a little more detail. The first I want to talk about is the bear. Okay, so you see here I've summoned the bear. This functions as a real summon. It has its own action, bonus action, movement. It has its own stats and abilities, its own hit points and armor class. And just automatically, in systems like BG3 or 5th edition, summons like this, ones that get their own actions, are always good because they come at a very low opportunity cost, right? In fact, they don't even have a cost. They're just more action economy. That's really good in an action economy based system. So while you might not be impressed by these animal companions, remember that they're costing nothing, they're just giving you something. And that's always good. Now, for example, the black bear, and you can summon these unlimited times per day. The black bear has 19 hit points, so it's just giving your party 19 extra hit points per combat. If it dies, you just resummon it, there's another 19. That's a lot. That's a lot of extra actions that you're canceling. Or you're absorbing, rather. And the black bear also gets Goading Roar. This is the same as the Goading Roar that the polar bear gets, which is a Circle of the Moon Druid shapeshift that we talked about when we discussed the Druid. This is a taunt. Now, I forgot to mention in the Druid video, Goading Roar has been bugged for me in patch 7. It just hasn't been working, so hopefully they fix that. But of course, the intention is that this is a taunt. When you use Goading Roar, enemies will come and attack you. Now, it's a low DC, and that's a shame. But it's still such a good ability, because what you can do with this, besides drawing aggro to your refreshable animal companion, if this thing dies, it just doesn't matter for us, because we'll summon it again after next fight. So besides taunting, you can use this to taunt enemies away from your melee strikers, which will proc attacks of opportunity on them. And that's giving you the same thing as Giant Killer gives you. It's using your reaction to reliably make a standard attack so good. So good. So that is the bear. Next one I want to highlight is the wolf. The wolf is probably the best purely offensive animal companion in my estimation. Why? Its offensive stats aren't the best here. But it has this ability called Pack Tactics, where it has advantage on attack rolls against a target if one of its allies is within 3 meters or 10 feet and isn't incapacitated. So it's actually pretty accurate. That's the big thing, it's pretty accurate. And most of the animal companions do not have accurate attacks because they don't get a proficiency bonus, from what I can tell. So this makes the wolf the most reliable by far. And then they have technically this lunging bite, which does less damage but can knock an enemy prone, which may be able to give you advantage on your attacks against them. So it's the teamwork companion, very offense oriented. So that's its niche. What else do I want to talk about? Now, the wolf spider, I won't summon it. The wolf spider, it used to just be like a giant spider summon, and it was by far the best one. But they've nerfed it, and now I feel like the wolf spider just doesn't compete. It's not a trap option, but it's not as good as the wolf or the bear or the raven. Technically, it does get a poison effect on its bite. Enemies must make a DC 13 Constitution save to resist it. If they fail, they get the poison condition for 2 rounds, 2 turns. Poison condition gives them disadvantage on their attack rolls, so it's kind of a debuffer. The wolf spider debuffs enemies. It also gets a web attack, and it's a DC 12 dex save to become enwebbed. That's the wolf. Raven. The raven is the weakest statistically, but it has some hidden features that make it very strong. This isn't hidden. This is an attack that it can make called Rend Vision. This Rend Vision, the raven attacks the enemy's eyes, and if it hits, that target is blinded. A blinded enemy is like poisoned, except you also get advantage on attacks against them. So you get advantage against them, they have disadvantage against you. That is very potent. And unlike the spider, the raven does not have a saving throw to resist. If this attack hits, they're blinded for 2 turns. That's it. No saving throw. So it's not a double hit feature. It's a single hit, which to me really makes the Raven the more superior version of the Spider. Raven also gets a bonus action fly of 18 meters, and then in combination with, this is the hidden feature, the fact that Ravens are immune to attacks of opportunity. They can't get engaged. They're too wily for that, you know? So you can just run through enemies, blind priority targets, fly away. They won't get an attack of opportunity against you. Fly away somewhere where they can't target you, and then fly back next turn, blind someone again, run away. You get the idea. It's the guerrilla tactics, hit and run. You can blind targets, and that gives you such an advantage on attacks against them. So the Raven really is fantastic. It's probably the best. It's between the Raven and the Bear. The Wolf has I would say the Wolf's a little worse, but it has its own niche. So if you want to go for the Wolf, that's absolutely a good option. There's only really one trap option, and that is the Boar Companion. Now, I've never used the Boar Companion a lot. That's because when I just look at its stats, I see that it sucks. Now, but because I haven't tested it extensively, there might be something I'm missing about it. If you've used the Boar and there's something I don't know about it, please tell me in the comments. But my problem with the Boar is it just has not very high hit points and low armor class on top of it. Its niche is supposed to be this charge attack, which potentially knocks enemies prone, and it's like the Wolf, that it knocks enemies prone, except that it's a DC to resist. Unlike the Wolf, was the Wolf a DC? Actually, the Wolf was a DC. So, okay, fair enough. It has the ability to knock somebody prone. However, and it's AoE, so it's technically better than the Wolf for that. But the Wolf is just doing more damage. And so, yeah, I just think the Wolf's a better version of the Boar. Boar seems like a trap choice to me. That's just me. If you feel differently, please let me know in the comments. I mean, it is adorable, though. Like, you can pick it just for how cute this guy is. And I think that's it for the Beastmaster. So what rank do I give the Beastmaster? I rank it the same as the Hunter, an A tier. It is not as good from a purely offensive point of view as the Hunter, but you just cannot underestimate the extra action economy that you get from these summons. I mean, it's just more hit points per combat, it's more actions, reactions, bonus actions, movement per combat, and some of these summons are really useful. Like I've said, the Bear, the Wolf, the Raven, these aren't weak units. So I think Beastmaster is kind of an overlooked subclass, I find. I don't see a lot of builds around it. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it is actually quite good. It's an A tier in my books. That's it for the Ranger class, folks. I'll see you next week.